Шановні гості, ви можете залишатися на своїх місцях, а для бажаючих працює фотозона.
Красный.
Пані та панове, з радістю повідомляємо вам, що сьогодні у нас на конгресі працюють такі локації: дитяча кімната, дві фотовиставки, спеціальне місце для фотографування, прес-вол та локація для роботи медіа.
Второй. Третий. Есть Никита? Четвертый.
Пані та панове, перша дискусійна платформа розпочнеться за 5 хвилин, рівно об 11:00. Просимо вас займати місця в залі. Нагадуємо, що ведеться відео та онлайн-трансляції. Просимо вимкнути або перемкнути у режим тиша мобільні телефони та інші електронні пристрої. Бажаємо усім плідної роботи! Пані та панове, перша дискусійна платформа розпочнеться за 5 хвилин, рівно об 11:00. Просимо вас займати місця в залі. Нагадуємо, що ведеться відео та онлайн-трансляції. Просимо вимкнути або перемкнути у режим тиша мобільні телефони та інші електронні пристрої. Також просимо вас щільніше займати свої місця і бажаємо успіх! Я додав. Dear guest, we are happy to welcome you at the first Ukrainian Women's Congress. First discussion platform will start a few minutes. Please take your seats. We remind you about online translation, so please turn your phones and all other devices off. We wish everybody a fruitful walk. For your convenience, we provide two language translation. Translation device you can get at the registration. Channel 1, Ukrainian, Channel 2, English. Please, take your seats.
Можливо, я перепишу собі чи як? Зараз, зараз. Я говорив, так.
Шановні пані та панове, перша дискусійна платформа розпочнеться за кілька хвилин. Просимо вас щільніше займати свої місця в залі. Шановні гості, просимо вас займати свої місця. Ми розпочинаємо за 1 хвилину. Пані та панове, для зручної роботи ми забезпечуємо синхронний переклад 2 мовами. Технічні пристрої для перекладу ви можете отримати біля зони реєстрації. Канал 1 – українська мова, канал 2 – англійська мова. Шановні гості, розпочинаємо засідання першої дискусійної платформи «Роль жінки в суспільно-політичному житті країни. Погляд зсередини та погляд ззовні». Представляємо модераторку Олена Конdratiuk, народна депутатка України.
Co-head of the Interfactional Union Equal Opportunities. I would like to invite the speakers of the discussion platform. Tsintsadze, Vice Prime Minister on issues of European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Iryna Herashchenko, the first Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Ukraine, and the President representative on the peaceful negotiation for registration in the Donetsk and Luhansk movements. The statements of Georgia and questions of peaceful negotiation and civil equality, and the mission of state in Russia and Belarus. OSC, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. The member of the Icelandic Parliament, the head of the representative of the Iceland in the Parliament. And now I'd like to give the floor to Olena Kondratiuk. Good afternoon once again, dear colleagues of all genders, ladies and gentlemen. Today we begin each of our platform with a small video which we prepared to present a particular topic, and that's what I'd like to show video number 1. The stereotype that politics is a man's occupation is still alive, and although officially women have the same status in politics as men, in fact they suffer discrimination. This happens due to the low social status of women, their economic dependency on men, and unequal separation of family obligations. In the parliaments of the world right now, there are only 23% of women. In the Ukraine, even less, and this is the highest number for all of the years of our country's independence. And among the 24 members of the government, only 3 women are there. The consolidation of the female movement and state policy may be conducive to gender equality, for instance, gender quotas on the parliament level, or voluntary quotas on party levels. Such quotas exist in most EU countries. Only 6 countries in Europe don't have them. At the same time, the most economically and socially developed countries have more than 40% women in their parliaments. Are we ready to start asking this question of women's presence in the social and political life? Thank you very much. We all saw this video. We will try right now on our platform to discuss what are the peculiarities and problems of actualization of opportunities and potential of women in all spheres of public life. What is the gender policy in Ukraine? Is it successful? What are the following steps we can do in this issue? Now I'd like to begin by giving the floor to Ms. Ingeborg, because she has incredibly great experience of administrative work, human rights work in various human rights organizations. She was a minister of Iceland, an MP, the mayor of Reykjavik for a long time, a founder of a women's party, and right now the head of the Bureau of Democratic Institutes and Human Rights in the OSCE. Ms. Ingeborg, what can you tell us, Ukrainian women? What's your advice to strengthen human rights, especially with the Ukraine's particular situation with regards to military actions? How important are women's rights in this particular issue? Thank you very much. Велике дякую. І по-перше, дозвольте мені поздоровити вас всіх з цим дуже вражаючим конгресом, який ви тут організували. Я хочу сказати, що я не була навіть готова для такого великого конгресу. Бачивши всіх цих жінок тут, я думаю, що ви створюєте інерцію руху для України.
To Ukrainian women. I know that you've done that before, but you know, gathering so many women here is sending a clear message, I think, to everybody in Ukraine, that you expect Ukraine not to take baby steps when it comes to gender equality, but to take huge steps. And I think it's due time to do that. And I think, and I've seen that happening over and over again, that when women gather, when women not only for themselves, but for the society in general, then we can see things happening. And I'm sitting here, I must admit that although I am the director of OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, I'm also sitting here with my political hat. Because I sometimes say that I am a bit of a political animal. I was in politics for 30 years in one way or another, working all the time on gender equality and women's empowerment. That was actually why I entered politics in the first place. That was what initiated my participation in politics. It was the urgent need to change the things for the better, for increasing gender equality. And like I said, I've seen this happening over and over again when women come together and really join forces and show solidarity. And again, I must also say join forces across political parties, across all walks of life. Then they can move mountains. And I have the feeling that there is a moment in Ukraine now. I think, you know, there's a lot of institutions, both government institutions, NGOs, international organizations that can support Ukrainian women in doing this. And of course, ODIHR is one of them. ODIHR has been mandated by the 57 participating states of OSCE to work on democratization and human rights. And we cannot talk about genuine democracies or democratic institutions if half of the population does not have a full representation in these democracies or in these organizations. So if we really want to have genuine democratic institutions, then women have to be represented. And therefore, it is one of the roles, for example, of ODIHR to support the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian government institutions in delivering on the commitment that they have given, as all the other participating states of ODIHR, to work on democracies, and there it's inclusive democracy with women's rights and gender equality as part of it. And I think I must say that we have been trying to do that by implementing a project here in Ukraine that is supporting the Equal Opportunities Caucus in their tireless and extraordinary efforts to advance gender equality in Ukraine, including in organizing this event. Because at the end of the day, it's the Ukrainian women with the support of men that can change this reality, but we can support it. And let me just conclude by saying, and now I'm saying this, I'm drawing on my more than 30 years of experience in this area, that there, and I know some of you have heard me saying this before, that there is the same recipe for success when it comes to gender equality everywhere. It applies to every society, every country, this recipe. And there are three main ingredients in this recipe. It's first of all a strong and vibrant and vocal women's movement, because that's where things start. That's what moves this whole agenda. Secondly, there is someone at political level, someone that has a political power that is genuinely willing to take this agenda forward, and is speaking on behalf of the women's movement, and is ready and to take the risk to do that, because it's risky in politics to really genuinely talk about gender equality and women's empowerment and not shy away from doing that. So that is needed. And the third component in this recipe is money, because you need money to change things for the better. So women's movement, political power and money, and you will see huge steps taken forward when it comes to gender equality. Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо, пані. Я думаю, що будуть ще додаткові запитання.
Thank you very much. There might be some more questions from the
Я би
audience
хотіла теж
later.
передати слово першому
With this, I'd like to turn
заступнику
over to
голови
the
Верховної
first
Ради,
deputy
пані
chair of
Ірині
the
Геращенко.
Supreme Council, Iryna Herashchenko. When we were getting started, we would not think of a Congress attended so massively. It all began in 2011. A lot has changed ever since, and we understand that women's activity and responsibility is needed in the parliament. Lots of changes happened, and we're happy to see the first reading of the new electoral code. It has 40% quota for one of the genders, not necessarily women, just one of the genders. So my question is this. Iryna, you are among the bosses in the parliament, and for the first time ever in Ukraine, there is a majority of women in the... Did that have any effect on the efficiency of the parliament? And secondly, are there any undertones? Or another way, is that 40% quota become a reality? Or maybe they're gonna pass this law in the second reading? What do you think? Thank you, Olena. Well, first off, I'd like to commend Equal Opportunities Organization and MFO, Olena, co-chairs here, Svetlana, Maria, Olena Babak. She's not in here right now, but she has contributed to making this forum possible. It is so much important for the women in Ukraine and women outside of Ukraine. 6 years ago, we set up the MFO Equal Opportunities, and we had ambitious goals. We wanted to overcome gender stereotypes in politics and in society at large in this country. And secondly, it's not about getting more people in politics, because singers and circus artists would be featured in the top 5 on the electoral list in Ukraine, but there would not be female politicians. So we want to have more women there, but in particular, we would like them to be influential on decision makers. So over the last 6 years, we have made a lot of ground. We have covered a lot of ground in addressing stereotypes, and now women enjoy a lot more influence on decision makers. I meet with the electorate pretty often. When they see me, they say, "You're so small, we thought you're bigger. How can you run the parliament?" I say, "There is a speaker in charge of the parliament." But I help them take care of things in the parliament. And there should be 3 things in place. You have to have the sense of humor. Without that, you cannot do politics in the Ukraine. Ukrainian men sometimes too serious, which is why they often lose. You have to be ironic. I mean, sometimes you have to smile to yourself, admit that you're wrong, and tomorrow things will be better. And you have to have the backbone, and when you all know that you've got it, then they will never be able to break you. We have been able to overcome sexism in the Ukrainian politics. Right now, when you tell somebody you're a sexist, that's quite a trouble to them. And some of the sexists had to apologize. After 40, a woman doesn't look good. No way they should say it in politics these days. But still you get a lot of stereotypes around. And these stereotypes are found in terms of perceived in politics. There is no woman in the Ukraine who would hear things like, well, sexist statements about her age, her looks, weight, the color of her hair, like, where was she before that? How did she build her career? Sometimes there's no higher education and stuff like that. In the parliament, there are only 3 people without higher education, and all of them are men. How did you get there? Who brought you there? And what are you doing there? We're gonna take care of ourselves. So we have learned to do it, but there is a lot of ground to cover. Would we like to see more feminine solidarity in the parliament? Yes, that's true. Sometimes it is missing there. Some of the matters are important to us, and we should not be broken down by party tickets and things like that. Equal Opportunities Caucus is a classy foundation for that. Many men, MPs, have been honored to join this caucus. We only accept the ones who have particular principles, and President Poroshenko keeps saying that over his long career, he only was a member of Equal Opportunities Caucus and nothing else. And I think it is an important message. Right now, he is the commander-in-chief of the country. And the largest problems of sexism and overcoming gender stereotypes are found in law enforcement agencies. So, jointly with the commander-in-chief, we're going to be able to overcome gender stereotypes in those law enforcement agencies. And I'd like to turn to some of the key items that I'm addressing in my job. I'm not going to speak about lawmaking, and it's not about putting things in order in the parliament, but what I'm really proud of is that I believe that sometimes it is important to make sure that respect for parliament would start from the way we view or perceive the parliament. If you've got some posters in there, some papers, everybody comes over willing to make a statement. You better do this back home. Men would not notice that, but I started doing something about that because it goes in breach of the regulations and it's a disrespect to the historic premises. If it's clean indoors, everything will be all right. Let's make it clean indoors in the building, then it's going to be clean inside our minds. We also do peacemaking. 90% of my time is spent on difficulties in Donbass, peace, hostages, stuff like that. I'm positive that Ukrainian women have to be more involved in peacemaking processes, like in Croatia, in Northern Ireland. When women join the negotiations, they have been able to produce an impetus to all political parties, and they signed the peaceful agreements. Women seek to find a compromise. They are motivated for peace. Typically, women are tougher in negotiations. They will stand out for their principles and will not be afraid. I know this. That's what I'm like, and my fellow colleagues are like. I'm certain that peacemaking efforts of the Ukrainian women have been underestimated. Among 158 hostages that are found in occupied territories, over 15 months they have not been released. There are 10 women among them, civilians. They worked with law enforcement agencies, and we're supposed to liberate them all. If we speak about humanitarian aspects, well, the militants would have had to greet Ukrainian women, releasing them, letting them go. The rest of the world is silent. They did not say a thing about that. Only Ukraine keeps saying about this. It's not all right to see slavery in the 21st century and hostages. Right now we can see that because of the difficulties in Donbass, women have been severely affected. Lots of them are IDPs right now. Losses have been sustained by the Ukraine. More than 1,300 women have become widows. They gave their sons to that conflict. About 2,000 husbands have died. We have about 1,300 young women who are now widows. 2,100 women lost their sons. They gave away their most precious thing, and they have to be a part of peacekeeping efforts. They would like their husbands to be released and their sons released from hostage. By contract, we've got more than 23,000 women in the army. Officers' positions are occupied by 2,900 women. We've got 43 feminine colonels, but no generals. We're happy to welcome feminine generals from other countries, but before the next Congress, we would like to have one feminine general in the Ukraine. So I believe that in this resolution, which we're going to pass tomorrow, there should be an article addressing overcoming gender stereotypes in law enforcement sector to make sure that we're going to get more feminine officers out there. Thank you, Iryna. In the next panel, we're going to address women and peacekeeping. Is going to be moderated by my colleague Irina Fries and Maria Ivanova. And with this, I'd like to turn to Ms. Ketevan Tsikhanishvili, the State Minister of Georgia on Reconciliation and Civil Equality. Ketevan stands out for the European integration in Georgia, and she's got a tremendous experience working in NGOs. She used to be in charge of the Georgian National Platform, the largest among Georgian NGOs. So there's a question for you. After the civil sector, how do you feel working in the government? How does it feel? In Ukraine, there seems to be a lot of qualified personnel, but I'd like to hear you speak about some advice for us. I don't know if you've got quotas in the parliament or in political parties. So what do you think about the growing number of active women in the politics and the government?
Дуже вам дякую. Я дуже радий сьогодні бути з вами. Я дякую за запрошення. Що змінилося? Ну, я залишилася такою, як
portfolio, which is not the easiest one, and big responsibility.
це велика відповідальність, коли працюєш в парламенті. Я завжди вірила в громадянське суспільство. Більше жінок має залучатися до миротворчого процесу, тоді буде більше миру в світі.
Politics, more official politics can be. And I can totally boldly extend this and replicate over all spheres of public life. First of all, gender equality is about fairness, and we had already a speaker saying that you cannot deal effectively with an issue if the half of population, in many cases majority of population, because women are the majority of population in many countries, like in Georgia, we are 52.3% if they are not included. And of course, gender equality also shall be something that is very natural and rational strive of any society. After all, we all want to make best use and put together the energy, talent, and capacity of the society for overall development and progress. And this is again not attainable if the female part is not enrolled respectively. And when I say that, of course, there is no prejudice to our male colleagues and counterparts. Quite the contrary, I believe that they have a totally key role because they are the holders of major decision-making positions. And the good thing and the good news that we all share in this room and beyond, that this is a very important task. But of course, goodwill is not enough. You have asked me about what's going on in Georgia. We need to have legal, institutional, and practical provisions to make this all work in life. In terms of legal provisions, we have a few milestones, such as, for instance, a law on preventing domestic violence and violence against women from 2006, gender equality law in 2010, law on elimination of all forms of discrimination in 2014, and last but not least by importance, ratification of the Istanbul Convention this year in May, which trickled respective changes into 24 national legislative pieces. In terms of an institutional arrangement, we have on both legislative and executive branches standing bodies that are ensuring or working towards the gender equality. In the parliament, we have a Gender Equality Council, and we have some of the parliamentarians here in the room. They're going to be speaking later, I guess today, to speak more concretely what they do. For instance, they have just freshly started an initiative, a project which is called Gender Impact Assessment, to scrutinize and analyze all the laws in terms of their impact on men and women separately, which I find quite interesting. In the government, we have an interagency commission that deals with 3 major working groups and action plans against violence, preventing violence against women. The second, and particularly dear to my heart and my work, is the implementation of the UN Security Council 1325 resolution, Women, Peace and Security. And the third one is about empowering women and gender equality. So also we have, by the way, the Prime Minister's assistant who is coordinating the whole work, and she's also going to be speaking about the details. My point is, like, what do we have in practice? Do we achieve something when we have all these provisions on ground? Actually, we do. When it comes, for instance, for domestic violence, with what I have started, in most of the cases, 87% of the cases, domestic violence means violence against women. We have decreasing number of cases, but increasing number of reports to the police, which means that the trust to police and effectiveness of the measures is increasing. And you know, there are many factors, you know, trainings, criminal sanctions, hotlines, shelters, but there is one specific human-related factor that contributes most. And you know what it is? It's an inclusion of a woman police officer in a team of 2 when they go for calls on domestic violence. This made a tremendous change in terms of a trust from the victim side to the police. And this drives me to the major point, the importance of including women in all spheres, also in the so-called non-conventional spheres, such as police or defense. For instance, in the defense ministry now we have around 50% women, which is a good development. Likewise in the National Defense Academy. Economic empowerment. I think you will be speaking about it. Extremely important for achieving gender equality. Also here, I just took one figure that gives me much of hope. We started a few years ago support to the startup businesses in Georgia called Produce in Georgia. And in the last 2 years, 40% of the beneficiaries have been women, so they are making their way. And in politics, we are moving slowly but steadily. We are not yet there at all. I've seen the figures from Ukraine. In the parliament, maybe we are doing slightly better. We are having 15% women representation, which means 23 members of the parliament out of 150, and 20 of those women hold the high-ranking decision-making positions. In the government, in the cabinet, we are slightly lagging behind. We are 11% in percentages, but in fact, we are 2 women at the moment. Of course, we want more, but when you take, largely the government and executive branch, including, for instance, deputy ministers or the other managerial position, you go up to 24%. Again, if you ask me, are we there? At all not. And of course, we have to be very ambitious for different reasons. And one of the reasons is that Georgians very much like to be, proud of their past and history sometimes. And we are often very proud of the matter that once upon a time, in early 13th century, we have been the land of a woman king, not the queen, the king, Tamar. And of course, we have that legacy as an inspiration. But whatever we do, of course, with a view to our future and the way we want to develop. I mind the time, but in my concluding remark, I just cannot say what matters for our future most and what is the area where the engagement of women is particularly important. Peace and security. Our both countries, Ukraine and Georgia, perhaps share most their strive for peace, security, and normal environment for development, because we share, unfortunately, the major challenge, occupation of our territories. In Georgia also, 20% of territories are occupied by Russian Federation, and Russia is asserting its exclusive and ever-increasing control over these territories. There are 100 kilometers of razor wire fences and other artificial barricades that are isolating these 2 regions from the rest of Georgia and the rest of the world. And adding the invisible barriers that are generated by propaganda, this is all meant to mar the lives of the people on ground and to keep the divides as wide as possible. This very well falls under the strategy of divide and rule, which unfortunately, as it seems, Russia is applying to the wider neighborhood. And this is why we have to stand together with the international community and take effective measures, because peace and durable stability and security could not be achieved without resolving these conflicts. And here, the role of women is tremendous. Not only the women are the most vulnerable and often, the victims of the conflict and the war, they are most resilient, courageous, outspoken agents of change and peace. This is what I have seen. Now, women are included in official negotiations from the Georgian delegation side, which is not the case, by the way, on the other side of the table, I must say, so we never have women counterparts yet. But they are most active in civil society and public diplomacy. Most of the dialogue projects that happen between the conflict-split communities, because dialogue and reconciliation is one of the branches of our policy together with deoccupation with respect of Russia, the women are most, again, successful in finding the ways, building the bridges on the other side of divide. And I take all my rights and inspiration, if you wish, when I say that from a personal episode a few years ago when I came to this office. One of the first people I met were a group of the mothers who lost their son in Abkhazia in the 90s. And they came and asked for a meeting. They didn't ask for help. They offered help. They spoke of importance of peace and reconciliation and dialogue to never again go through the tragedy and pain they live with forever, and they offered to take the first steps if necessary. I feel up to now inspired. I feel encouraged by that women, and this is why I believe they are the very strongest agents of change. I hope in this turbulent world, which unfortunately doesn't become a safer place every day, especially for our countries, which are so severely challenged every day for its own security, we can conjoin efforts, and maybe we really should ask ourselves, would this world look different if we had more women? I do believe so. I leave it for your discussion, and I hope that the women who are today engaged in politics, in peace, we can take this hard responsibility to also drive by example. So I wish you all success, especially the ladies in the room, in the endeavors for the good of our dear aims. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ну що ж, я думаю, що буде ще багато питань до вас, але ми зараз
There might be many more questions for you later, but with this, would like to turn over to the colleague from our side, Ivanna Klympush Tsintsadze, Vice Prime Minister in European and Euro-Atlantic integration. It's a Euro-Atlantic category, but that was a slip of a tongue. All right. The Prime Minister spoke this morning, and he humbly said that the government doesn't seem to have a concept as such. They are trying to shape it up. I'd like for you to tell us, is there a gender concept in this incumbent government in the Ukraine? What do you think? And secondly, yesterday you said that you were selecting somebody for the office of the gender ombudsman. What do you think that person should be like? What should be their qualifications, traits, and what do you think they will be able to do in that office? So what are the expected results from the work that's going to be done in that government office? Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear fellow colleagues in the Parliament and guests who came from around the world, I'd like to say that the idea that has been around for quite a while has finally materialized, and it's been a good start, and I think it's going to be a good follow-up on those active discussions. I'm positive that, or better say, I would not agree with what you, Olena, are saying, suggesting that in the government there seems to be no idea as to how gender equality policy should be pursued. As the Prime Minister said, it is the first government in the Ukraine where there has been an initiative from the Equal Opportunities Caucus, and a decision was made by the Vice Prime Minister. They decided to coordinate the equal opportunities policy. So all of that responsibility rests with the Vice Prime Minister on Euro-Atlantic integration, which is myself. And I guess over the last half a year, ever since I have been taking care of this, we have been able to do quite a lot of things in terms of understanding the situation in the security and defense sector. And speaking of the above sector, I'd like to say a few words about that later on in the panel. I guess we have been able to start off quite some processes which were there formally in the Ukrainian government over years, even decades. There is a law on equality of men and women has been around for quite a while. It's like everything good against everything bad. So that law does not carry enough tools. So we understand we need the office of the government officer, and we need the government officer and a team which would be capable of establishing good coordination among all of the ministries in order to enable practices that are mentioned in the law, and that every ministry would be able to make use of those. Well, with the help of the civil society colleagues and international institutions like the UN Women, we have been able to float a lot of ideas and plans and strategic products. We just need to start translating them into life, and I'm looking forward to getting this gender ombudsman or officer to be elected, and I guess it's going to be somebody. Is it going to be a man or a woman? there have been 2 men contending for the position and 5 women. So there is somebody to choose from. So it all is based on equal opportunities concept. It's an interesting development. I actually believe that it is important to see that equal opportunities are upheld by men as well. We may keep telling that we need equal opportunities, but if Sergei Kislitsa is not going to be the key expert in the civil service and among politicians and diplomats in the Ukraine in terms of gender equality, then we're going to be getting nowhere fast. So we would like to see more high-quality people upholding equality of both genders. So, although we have produced something, we can see what's the further outlook, and I'd like to actually get my hands on that, and we're going to be able to pursue all of these ideas, and we're going to work with the government and the parliament. It's a unique case where we initially think about how to take care of gender equality. It's not somebody doing this in the parliament, in the government, but all together are in it and on it. So here's my point. So right now, we've got about 12% of women in the parliament for the first time ever in the Ukraine. And sometimes people believe that it is 50% of them there. Why? Because women, they care and they are more active in doing what it takes on the job and in the outside world, and they try to give a hand to somebody else in need of help, which hardly ever happens in men, which is why we've got women in the parliament, which pave the way for everybody else that will follow, and they will no longer have to go through the deadwood. They would actually have to do their professional job, pursuing their duty and following their job descriptions. Speaking of the government, 55% of women are in civil service, but they are not in managerial positions. In the civil service in some ministries, we've got more than 85% of women in principle. We keep moving on, and when it comes to deputy ministers, that's where it gets better in terms of women's involvement. That's where we've got 40% of women as deputy ministers. That's quite a progress. We never had that sort of thing before. When we go up to the government level, 3 by 24, that's 8.5% represented in the parliament. We know that, according to research, which has recently been published, it's the American research, they canvassed 64,000 women in 23 countries, and they could see that there are private companies which have women as board members. The financial performance of those companies compared to other companies where only men are in the board. So they've got 25% better performance, financial performance, if they've got women on board. It's not because women are better than men. It means that while making decisions, the company looks at a particular problem or goal or task, and they try to take different angles on that, and that company can do it better. So the resulting decision is more efficient, and that's what's missing in our case in the Ukrainian politics and in many businesses. And everywhere else, in civil life and in the parliament. So if we could look at the problem considering different points of view, then we would be able to make more efficient decisions, and our development, our progress would have been a lot better and more sustainable in terms of predictability and outcomes. So we've got room for improvement in order to increase representation of women in decision-making positions. And this recent NDI study has been completed back in spring of this year, trying to see how women in Ukraine and the entire society perceive women's involvement in political activity and decision-making. Turns out, most of the society believes that women should not be involved in political decision-making. Most women actually believe that it is not their cause, it's not what they're supposed to do. But still, it is generally believed that in politics, in managerial decisions, it should be 50-50 representation of women and men. So I'm convinced that if there is readiness in society to go forward, things will be looking up. Because if we fail to understand what's behind it, nothing's gonna give. So we have to capture this opportunity, and hopefully, based on what we have done so far in the government and with the support of the government, we're going to be able to make progress in terms of changing legislation, making it better, and also in terms of internal procedures in all ministries. Each ministry has its own responsibility in terms of pursuing gender policy, because it's gender budgeting, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy, gender expert assessment, Ministry of Justice. I have gathered a council once in order to see how ministries address these things. How do they approach gender expert assessment? I checked with deputy ministers on that, and it is a part of their job description to address gender equality in their ministry, and most of them learned about having to do that. They never knew that before. Well, most of them were not ready to do this, to have this talk. So we began one of the projects jointly with the young women, where we retrain all of the lawyers in ministries to make sure they can do this gender expert assessment. We've got lots of things to do, and I can speak at length about that. But certainly, we are breaking away from just formalities and declarative gender equality, and we are beginning the legal job, which has to be completed.
Thank you for explanation. We didn't have any doubt ever since you came to other government that there was the starting point for moving along with this problem. I'd like to give the floor to our colleague Iryna Lutsenko, also our ally in the Equal Opportunities Caucus, but today she represents not only just as an MP but as a president's representative. If you would let me, Mr. Iryna, I would like to ask you a question on the attitude of the president to this issue, because really the head of state really should also not be indifferent to gender politics, because he can introduce his draft laws to the parliament. We would like to hear whether he really supports this elective code with the quota to persons of one gender, or whether he could show by personal example, by introducing more women in his vertical of power, like female ambassadors. I think that we have like only 4 or 5 of them, or governors. We only have 1 female governor in the Kharkiv region, or maybe he could go on a third way, particularly by promoting gender equality, but in personal addresses, and whether the president should actually do this at all. Thank you, Olena. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to greet you all on this Congress, a very needed thing for Ukraine and for all of us who have gathered here. and to those women, unprotected parts of the society who expect results from this grand Congress. And right now, on the vision of the president of this issue, I thought, should I begin this speech? And I remembered this old Soviet movie, Moscow Doesn't Believe Tears. I think most of the people saw it here, where a woman who was leading a great factory, she was asked, well, you have 7,000 police, how do you manage all of them? She said, you have to learn to work with 3 people and it's gonna be all smooth sailing from there. And the president did the very important 3 people chose, like Iryna Herashchenko, who is responsible with the very complicated armed aggression hostage situation. Over 2,000 hostages were there due to Iryna Herashchenko's efforts. She has contributed great effort to this. Her colleagues coming from the Minsk process, she has to spend the day from this to take rest from all of this fierce contraction. Only 200 approximately hostages are left right now. Incredible efforts by just a small tender woman who carries this work alone. And this including the fact that she has a large family, 1 grown-up child and 2 small children who also want to receive mother's attention. I don't know how she manages to do this, but this is an entire profession to protect Ukraine. This is Iryna Herashchenko, chosen by the President of Ukraine. Ivanna Klympush Tsintsadze was also appointed by the President. She was invited to his team. We were together parliamentaries who represented the Petro Poroshenko bloc, and he initiated and he insisted on for her to enter the parliament. He insisted on this and proposed her to lead this security sector, where it's always believed that this is exclusively a man's job. Women should only protect their children, but thanks to Ivanna Klympush Tsintsadze, we see serious transformation happening in the armed forces of Ukraine. This is a unilateral implementation of NATO standards. We believe back when we were still just parliamentaries, we summoned women to our meetings of armed forces representatives, how we made them quicken these processes, because we have understand how this partnership, which gives us this special status, this security union of countries, and we have to be involved in this. We have to adhere to their standards in armed forces and in the economy, all thanks to this woman who is very persistent, very strong. This is the security sector, and this is also the President's choice. Olena, medical reform, a volunteer who was the first to implement NATO first aid kits, who really saved lives of our boys in the East, who involved a great number of donors from the TV, propagating the issue of safety and survival of our fighters in the conflict zone, who was also involved in field hospitals. We know this directly because all of us here saw this happening over there. The President offered her this position, and we know that today, due to great effort, we have managed to implement this medical reform. She is a woman who, in 1.5 years of work, managed to make the government, the parliament, to implement this reform. And I believe that the money will follow the patient, and the constitutional guarantees, what the government guarantees to every citizen, access to health care, will be implemented. Thanks to Olena's support. Lana Zerkai, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. She fiercely giving herself fully to represent Ukraine in international courts. Incredible efforts, incredible results. A small, quiet woman with undeniable facts, with undeniable authority, achieves real serious results. This is first of all related to the issue of protecting the Crimean Tatar population. I could not just stop that. Men are also playing a great role in this. Sergei Kislitsa, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, his incredible efforts in the recent resolution to protect Crimean Tatars. Iryna Herashchenko was given great effort in the help of Turkey. Our Crimean Tatars, the particular persons who are freed and they are in Ukraine right now. I would like to applaud Lana Zerkal and Sergei Kislitsa for their efforts. And the representative of the President of the Parliament would like, I won't say too much, my own friends. I'd like to say, using the words from Herashchenko, she's like a witch flying all over the Parliament, making those MPs voting. Maybe we don't want, but when she approached me to pay additional alimonies, I did it gladly. I felt the same when my father left me and mother was left alone. I'd like just a small phrase from him, but I named only 4 women who implement gender equality. These are the presidential's arms, presidential's heads, presidential activity, and I can't omit a particular woman, Yulia Svetlichko, who is the head of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, who is this region is on leading positions in the social and economic development. She is an incredibly strong woman, young, willful. Her handshake is stronger than that of many men, and we have to remember that the Kharkiv region is 35 kilometers of border with Ukraine. It's continuous challenges, but she calmly, in a collected manner, continues the decentralization process. This includes repaired roads, includes cleanliness. Every ATO participant accounted for. All thanks to Yulia Svetlichna, who is continuously visited by the President of Ukraine, and if there is success in Kharkiv region led by a woman, as an example for women leadership all over the country. Recently, in particular meetings, a question was added to broaden the presence of female governors on these positions, because her example shows that women can achieve serious results, just like government representatives, parliament representatives. I would like to stop a little bit on how the issue of gender equality is being implemented due to presidential laws, more practically, which is supported in the parliament. I wrote a lot, but there's not enough time. The vulnerable groups which are present right now in Ukraine, women in villages, 37% of the population, almost 20% of total Ukraine population, displaced persons, 65% women, disabled persons, female disabled servants, orphans, many thousands of, hundreds of thousands of children are expecting to be adopted, but only 1,000 approximately are being adopted in a year. 500,000 women who bring up their children without receiving alimonies from their husbands. Women with small children who can find a job, who are being paid a smaller wage. Women who bring up children alone, and quite often there are 2 or 3 of those children. I'm sorry. Victims of domestic violence, 3 million women, 3 million children who are victims or witnesses. These are only those who are officially accounted for. Pregnant women, mortality among them is the highest in the European community. According to national data, 7 out of 10 children die in the cities, and up to 18 children die in the countryside. Victims of war, hostages, rape victims, victims of human trafficking, these are the most vulnerable groups of the population which the president remembers about and implements initiatives which are recently being implemented so that we could understand what is being done in the country, what are the laws directed towards, and how all of this will influence these groups to aid them. Recently, a week ago, the law was passed on village healthcare, 280 votes for. This law could be seen as positive discrimination by the president towards the 40% of the population of Ukraine, the village population, who suffer high mortality, lack of equipment, bad roads, lack of family doctors who are knowledgeable in these issues. This is lack of medicine in villages. This is what the law is supposed to address, to improve the material and technical base, to motivate village doctors to the right of people in the countryside to have decent infrastructure, decent roads, decent telemedicine, not to just go to a faraway city, but to have this family doctor in the town. This includes a great motivational package for a family doctor to stay in there. Next, judicial reform, which involves secondary legal aid to women. These are the women who fight for alimonies, for rights to property from men. These are women who work, who want to own land, to rent land. Farmers not always give back land, and these women, village women but in particular, require their secondary help. Protection of children. Recently we've passed a law where we included among the questions of national security, defend the child protection aspect that over 500 women have been mutilated in the conflict zone. Boys and girls were raped in the conflict zone. This is incredible, irreversible damage to their psyche and the future demographic gap. This issue was raised by the president and is included in the aspect of national security and defense, which will a very serious legal act, which will further down the road involve other legal acts. Then we have signed the law on education. The president signed, in addition to that, this is supported by the president's wife. She is a medic. She understands that there is a lack of wheelchair access, isolation, and many other negative aspects. They are still citizens of Ukraine. These are children these are mothers who can't come to pick up their children from school. Maybe the child is elderly but the mother is disabled. This law on inclusive education supports rights of both men and women, boys and girls. These are the correct gender laws which correct the opportunities of all citizens, because Ukraine has signed the world strategy of sustainable development. Just a couple more points. Budgetary, great amounts being spent on village medicine and development. The road experiment, as I've already mentioned, roads are very important for the countryside. Prozoro was implemented, the president was an indicator and proposed this very serious document which allowed Ukraine to save 17 billion. These are additional funds for subsidies, for free education of children who have come from the territory which is being bombarded and shelled. And then the law on local elections, where the female members of the Petro Poroshenko bloc have fought for this 30% quota. and the issue of decentralization, which has a great women's presence, allows to allocate funds to repair roads, repair kindergartens. This is all due to female influence working on locations. And the less, no Ukrainian president before had the bravery to introduce the Istanbul Convention. This president did. Two implementational laws are being already prepared on counteracting domestic violence, and the law on criminalization of domestic violence being prepared, was prepared by 58 members, including Oleg Leshko, who took an active part in this process. And to finalize, dear women, dear men, we are in the 21st century when the planet is suffering incredible crisis, not just an economic one, not just financial, not just political. It suffers a crisis of values, of democratic values. And what is democratic values? These are equal rights of every citizen. This is freedom, this is the right to choose, this is the right to self-actualization. And that's why many of the laws passed on equality between men and women in Ukraine. Ivanka has told you about this partially, but you can speak a lot of it about. I have a speech on about 30 of these laws, and the state has officially an opportunity and starting opportunities for every one of us, both men and women, to achieve and develop in the future. But every person living in this country has by themselves to find the power in themselves, the confidence, the knowledge, the understanding what that person can do for this self-actualization, and which brings actualization of the country. That's why I wish you to be confident, to remember that every one of you, he or she, is a person to give it your full, to build our future, and let us together create Ukraine. Thank you, Ms. Iryna. We hope that the President will support this 40% quota of one gender. Maybe we will speak about it separately. I would like to give the floor to our partners. These are Susanna Kosinski-Fritz, the head of the mission OECD in Ukraine, Belarus and Moldova. We are very thankful for the partnership in the Congress. We know that you also work together with the Equal Opportunities Caucus. You work together with the committee, with the Parliament Committee on Human Rights, with the state institution. Why is this support very important for your organization? I remember that you worked there and you were leading the group on elections, and you were working on developing a democracy in the countries of Europe, Eurasia. What do you believe is a challenge for Ukraine to quicken up this gender balance process? And you know, in the 70s there was such a thought widespread in the 80s as well, that 30% of one gender will be enough to balance certain issues in different spheres. And as I remember from Hillary Clinton's speech, it should be 50%. And what, in your opinion, should be this percentage for women in different spheres? Thank you very much.
Start by saying that the reason why USAID and other donors focus on gender and inclusion of gender is because it makes good development sense, meaning that you get better development results, you get more sustainable outcomes, and I'd like to touch upon a few of those topics today. So starting with, equitable participation of
Рівна участь чоловіків та жінок в політичному житті – це гарно для демократії, це інвестиція у краще майбутнє для всіх. Жінки, політики приймають рішення, щоб підвищувалися норми життя, краще було.
When women are given resources, they spend them on their families, whereas men do not. So from a development perspective, inclusion of women in development and in programs, whether it's in economic development or political development, it just makes good sense for better outcomes. We talked a little bit already, so I won't touch upon it, but about including women in peace processes, particularly early on, and how that leads to better outcomes in terms of peace processes and more sustainable outcomes, because women are focusing on sometimes topics that are not normally discussed amongst men. Also in the economic sphere, so the evidence shows that companies make more money when they're gender inclusive. We know that women are more likely to introduce bills that reshape legislation to make it more human rights centered. We also know that if women had parity with men in the global economy, it would add $28 trillion to the global GDP. We know that women are good managers because they're intuitive and better able to read others' emotional state of being, and they work differently in teams. They build consensus and lead teams in a more collaborative way. And we know that when women and men work together, that they innovate. So we talked a little bit, I don't want to repeat what others have already covered, but we've talked a little bit about some of the things that Ukraine has already done and ways in which we've seen Ukraine progress. So we talked a little bit about the percentage of the Rada, and while it's a record or we haven't seen as high numbers as we see today of women in the Rada, there's still a long way to go. However, I would point to the civil society sector, where you see civil society groups and NGOs and initiatives led by women, and maybe that's why we see such a vibrant civil society sector here in Ukraine, and a very important one in terms of pushing for reforms. And I also, we've also talked, you already mentioned the groups that USAID supports, and we will continue that work because across, whether it's the parliament or elsewhere, the work that women are doing here for inclusiveness are extremely important for development results. I also wanted to touch upon just the fact that the Vice Prime Minister has gender policy in her portfolio now is an indication of progress here in Ukraine, and we're looking forward to great things coming from that. Another area where USAID has seen some results is related to decentralization reform. 11 cross-party women's associations and local councils were created over the past year. I think women are more able to work across parties and across party lines for a common goal or common good. So just in closing, I want to emphasize that working to include women, include gender considerations in our programs and in our development work with our development partners achieves better development results. And what that means for Ukraine is better outcomes and increase in prosperity for the Ukrainian people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ну і остання учасниця нашої платформи – це
The last panelist for now, Torhild Dursuner-Zdoviri, the MP of Iceland Parliament, chair of the Pareves delegation in Iceland. To us, this country might be a showcase in a way because, according to the data in the report on difference in status of men and women for 2016, Iceland is an advanced country in terms of gender equality, based on global rating of gender equality. So the question is, Ms. Torhildur, what do you think were the key success factors behind it, which allowed Iceland to do so well in this? As far as we know, the number of women in your parliament is more than 47%. The existing trends suggested in the Davos Economic Forum only women will be chairing sessions. Could you let us in on the secrets of your young party? How can you handle these challenges?
Thank you very much. I regret to inform you that we no longer have this wonderful status in terms of the representation of women in the Parliament of Iceland. We just had another snap election just a few weeks ago. So the numbers dropped from about 47% to I think about 38%. And I think one of the important messages and one of the important sort of lessons that we can learn is that women should be forever vigilant, because the danger of backtracking, the danger of going backwards in terms of equality is always present. And we've seen this in this election that just passed. I would say that the recipe for success in Iceland has been, for one thing, the leadership of role models such as my colleague here, Ingibjörg Sólrún, who has shown us the way in fighting for equality in politics and played a role as a role model for our young women like myself in participating in politics, showing how it can be done. We've also always had a very strong-minded women's movement in Iceland that has made what I think are just very fair demands of equal participation, of being allowed to vote, of having a voice in public life and having a voice in making decisions. But it hasn't always been easy either. Now, as we stand right now, I feel like we are in a certain turning point where women in Iceland are noticing that if they do not stand guard and if they are not vigilant in terms of guarding equality, we can take steps backwards, as we've seen. So I came here to tell you a story about how 4 young women from the public toppled the whole government, but how the result of this has still been moving backwards when it comes to equality. So basically our story, it begins early this summer, where it came to light that a very, a formerly very influential man, a former lawyer, had gotten a court ruling stating that he could now again apply to practice law in Iceland. Now the reason this is relevant is because this man had been convicted for sexually abusing and raping 4 young teenage girls. He had served his time and had received a form of pardon that can be translated as restoration of honor. It is in the sense that once you get sentenced for a crime that has a prison sentence in it, you lose certain rights to do certain professions. Now this man, he'd lost his license to practice law because of his crimes. But there is a certain mechanism that has now actually been disbanded, but it involves the Minister of Justice and the President of Iceland signing a document that allows you to sort of expunge your record or restore your honor, as it has been called. Now, once it came to light that this man had received restoration of honor, as it was called, and had received permission to practice law again, the young women that were victims to his abuse said, this is not acceptable, this is not okay. And they went on a very public quest under a hashtag called Let's Speak Out, where they wanted to find out how this had happened, why, and who was involved and who was responsible. Now, another thing that was needed was a letter of recommendation, so to speak, from 2, as it was called, honored individuals that said that this person has reformed and is allowed to, have his record restored and his honor restored. And the response of the government was terrible in my mind. They refused to give information. They said everyone has the human right to get permission to work again in their chosen field. If they've served their time, then why shouldn't they be allowed to practice their chosen profession, in this case, a lawyer? Now, this man that we speak of, he was a very influential man back in the day before he abused and got sentenced for raping these girls. And now he was permitted to do this again, or to work as a lawyer again. Now these 4 young women, started a very large social movement that demanded answers as to who was responsible for this. Now, to make a rather long story short of how all of this unfolded, they eventually got the information that they wanted. And it also later came to light that many other abusers had gotten the same treatment. Many men that had abused children had had their honor restored through this process. of which there was one who is considered, he got the harshest sentence anyone who has ever abused children has had. He also had his honor restored. And it came to light after a very long sort of happening, which I was a bit involved with because I called committee meetings trying to find out the truth, because I spoke with these women and wanted to help them have their voices heard. And it came to light that the father of the prime minister had been one of these honored individuals that sent a letter of recommendation for this worst abuser in Icelandic history, in terms of sentencing anyway. And this was enough for one of the coalition, the father of the prime minister, if I didn't say that before, this was enough for one of the coalition partners in the government to say, we don't want to participate in this government anymore. And this was because they had kept it secret. The prime minister had kept it secret that his father was one of these people. And this played a part in the fact that the government didn't want to give out any information. And these women had to fight for quite a long time to get these information that they were really supposed to get. It was, supposed to be publicly accessible, these documents. But because it was the father of the prime minister, it was kept secret. And this toppled the government. These 4 young women who fought for what they considered justice, which I agree with is justice, just to know how it happened that the man that abused them got back his societal power. Now, we went from having the most equal parliament, I think, almost in the world. I'm not exactly sure where on the list we were, but we've been considered the role model for quite some time, to having quite a backlash through this election that was created by the government exploding in a way. And now we see a lot less women in parliament. And we see also a return to a lot more, let's say, old-fashioned values in Icelandic parliament. So what happened exactly, I cannot say, but my assessment would be this. It was women's fight for justice in a very sensitive issue, which still is a sensitive issue, even in Iceland, where we've come quite far, which is gender-based violence, rape, and sexual abuse. It was their fight for justice that toppled the government. And when you see that there's this great step forward, this great progress in the sense that this issue actually toppled a government, which is something we haven't seen before, then the response of society can be to go backwards, because perhaps it was just a bit too much, too fast, or because we didn't stand vigilant and think, okay, now we need to speak even louder about equality. So if I were to send any message about, good advice in terms of succeeding in creating a more gender-balanced and fair society, I would say to never drop your guard, especially when you feel like you've made a big advance or, somehow handed in a victory. Because exactly at that point, when you feel like, here, we've made it, that's when it can go back. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that be forever vigilant and also keep women's solidarity in place. It's very important. And I hope that for the next elections, we can again become the role model that we used to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And just to finish it up, I'd like to turn over to the ones who are partners, people, organizations which often support our efforts in keeping the balance in the gender equality. And I'm happy now to turn over to the Swedish ambassador, plenipotentiary extraordinary and plenipotentiary Mark Hagström. Шановні учасники дискусії, шановні учасники конференції, я дуже радий бачити вас тут сьогодні перед собою.
First of all, on behalf of the Swedish government, I wanted to congratulate you on the organization of this impressive and important conference. And thank you for the
Я дякую за нагоду сказати декілька слів тут. Може відгукнутися на те, що говорили раніше учасники дискусій. Додати щось від себе про ці аспекти. Дехто може поцікавити.
At this point, but I think you touched upon it. One reason probably is that Sweden has been very much involved in promoting gender equality. Actually, this is something that we have worked on globally for quite a long time. These last years, we have promoted a feminist foreign policy, which we, of course, here also work very much on from the embassy side. We also support a number of projects. Some of them have been mentioned. We work together with UN Women. We work with NDI. We work with the Gender Responsive Budgeting Project here in Ukraine. But I will not talk so much about these projects. I instead wanted to focus on two prerequisites, maybe for more gender equality, and two kind of points of action where I believe that this first Ukrainian Women's Congress, and of course the work of all of you in the panel and all of the important women that was mentioned by Iryna Lutsenko earlier on, can and will, I'm sure, play a role. So I think the first important prerequisite for more gender equality is about understanding and visibility. Because it's only when you know that there is a problem that you can start to act on this problem. And I think, of course, having such a conference and having all of you people here hearing about all of the things that you will hear and have already heard will be very important to raise the awareness of the very real problem of gender equality in Ukraine, which is a problem you share with all other countries in the world. Here in this context, one thing that has not been mentioned yet, but I think is extremely important, is the issue of statistics, the issue of having good facts on the table, to have statistics which clearly report the results for women and men separately. Because then, if you have the facts, now all of you know, and you have heard about many of the problems with gender equality. But if you have the facts, if you have the numbers, then it's much easier to be heard. I think the second prerequisite is about political will. And it's very encouraging to hear all the political will that we have heard here from the panel, also from the Prime Minister. We have heard that the President is committed to gender equality. And I have a sense also that things are changing, and I think this conference here is one example of this. There is more political will. And I also wanted very much to agree with the Deputy Prime Minister on one point. Well, I agree on many points, but one point in particular is that issue of gender equality is not a women's issue. It's very much an issue for both women and men. And I already mentioned that we have a feminist foreign policy in Sweden. We actually have a feminist domestic policy as well. And that policy is spearheaded by a male prime minister. So hopefully that can be an inspiration. So those were the two prerequisites. Then two action areas, and they have been mentioned already. I think the first one is representation. So despite all of the brilliant women we have here in the panel, despite all the brilliant women not in the panel, but that were mentioned during the various speeches, very much want to agree with my US colleague here about civil society. I think we have an enormous amount of brilliant women in civil society. Many of you are here. But despite this, of course, politics and debate in Ukraine is very much dominated by men. Actually, when I moved here 1.5 years ago, it came as a shock to me that most panels, most conferences, most roundtables are the absolute opposite of this panel. This panel has only women. Most other panels in Ukraine have only men. And this used to be the case also in Sweden. It's no longer the case. It has become natural for me to see mixed panels. So it was very strange to see almost all panels, also on TV, experts in media, almost only men. So I think there is a very, very important area to work on. And I think you have a golden opportunity here with the new election legislation, which has been mentioned already, and where it has good provisions on a gender quota. But this, of course, will be important, apart from also all the role models, which I think is also extremely important, of course. In Sweden, we have, it was shown in the video, all parties, or most parties, have agreed to voluntarily have every second person on their party list as a man and every second as a woman. So that has led to us having around 40% representation of women, and that is the level we have had since the early 90s in Sweden, thanks to this voluntary agreement between the parties. So finally, the last point, and this has also been mentioned, is about rights, and the focus here, I think, and it will be also, I know in one of the panels, is on violence against women. Here, I know quite a lot is starting to happen here in Ukraine. I think the Ministry of Interior is working very seriously with this. You will have the deputy, one of the deputy ministers from the Ministry of Interior here later in the conference, Anastasia Deva, who is working very seriously on this issue. But as we have seen, not least, and here I want to commend Novoye Vremya, who had a special focus on violence against women in the in its last edition, or last week's edition. This remains a big and to a large extent hidden still problem in Ukraine. And as we have seen in the global Me Too campaign, of course, this is not something that is unique to Ukraine. This is something that is happening around the globe, but something that each country has to work on, and where we do see, as I said, some progress. And of course, I can't leave this stage without mentioning, in this context, the Istanbul Convention. Of course, that would be, we heard about the Georgian example, which I think sounds like a positive and interesting example for you to look at of ratification of the Istanbul Convention. So finally, just to say that we are very engaged from the Swedish Embassy, from the Swedish government, for gender equality in Ukraine. We will remain engaged. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much. Шановні друзі, в нас залишається рівно хвилин на ваші запитання. Якщо є такі бажаючі, щасливі, ще готові задати пару питань.
We've got time for a couple of questions. I think the panelists will be happy to respond. Let me see your hands.
Якщо можна дуже лаконічно, щоб можна було лаконічно нам спікерам теж відповідати. Бо спікери дуже багато люблять говорити,
But please exercise brevity in questions, because we don't have much time left. Thank you very much for these inspiring speeches and statements. We really appreciate your support in things we do. But my question is for Ivanna. I'm Tatiana Baeva from Khmelnytsky region. I chair the civil society organization. I coordinate the NDI project. With us, nobody keeps gender statistics. Nobody makes it. And it keeps us from getting better as a movement. Sometimes we cannot find the right arguments. We wanted the local programs to share a gender quota in distribution of resources, but we do not have statistics for that. The tax office says we can give you 20,000 names, you make a sample, all of that. So please take it on board. We will appreciate that. Yes, we're going to take it on board. Next question. Anyone? Go ahead. Hello. I am enjoying this conference. A Dance in the Pocket. It's a charity organization of political prisoners. The women community in Ukraine, are we capable of renewing the system of values that Ms. Herashchenko told us about. It should be based on human values, and effectively we should review the worldviews, which should be based on human values, environmental, spiritual ones, and so on. Who is this question for? For anyone in the forum. I guess if Ms. Herashchenko spoke about values, she's sitting right here. And Ms. Lutsenko too. So maybe one of them could respond to them. Ukraine exhibits all of these modifications that happen in the world. Okay, let's see if we're ready for that or not. I think we are ready, but if men support us, we're going to be more than ready. Svetlana Solomatova, involvement expert. I've got a question about executive branch in the Ukraine. Which steps and programs are being developed, or actually what do you do in order to help women in rural areas and small towns join the current politics or policy that you're drafting? Anyone to answer? Iryna, fire away.
Збільшення жінок в політиці і їх активність не можна збільшити тільки законами. Це треба змінити свідомість. І мені здається, що в цьому напрямку ми намагаємося разом з чоловіками ламати
стереотипи. It's not just about passing the law which would make women take part in the politics. They should feel like doing that. They should feel support in doing that. So together we can make it happen. My fellow colleague Lutsenko told about the draft laws which allow for more opportunities to develop. So decentralization is the key word here. It offers a lot of opportunities to regions of the country. They take part in budgeting, humanitarian, social, and other activities. You should join in. As NGOs, you need to monitor processes. Gender-based budgeting is the right thing. Gender statistics should be done. It will improve gender-based budgeting. So you should take part in that. We're going to have a discussion later on today about decentralization and issues faced by women. You will get more statistics. There is a law on parties, and it says that there should be additional funding for parties if they pursue the presence of women. Suggests that there's going to be positive discrimination action. Parties are paid extra to involve more women. That's the current law, and the colleague mentioned that while speaking about statistics. I was surprised to hear that, because changes have been made to statistics in terms of general statistics for men and women which are employed, receiving payments, but also it includes other statistics, and all of that should be kept on board. And I don't know why they're not doing this. We also need to keep raising these matters with the MPs in the Supreme Council. In 2018, the government will keep funding parties in this did last year. It's related back to the minimum pay. It used to be 1,600 hryvnia. If the minimum pay goes up, 3,200, and then it's going to be closer to 4,000, then the funding should drop. So my point to women is this: you should raise this matter with the MPs. They should not only take care of their vested interests, but they should consider funding parties extra to keep you involved. And secondly, amalgamated territorial communities. A lot of work and a lot of finance has to be handled by those communities. You gotta be active. You gotta pitch in those processes. Offer yourself as candidates, show activity, take initiative. If you want to be elected, let them know you want to be elected and you can take care of things. Okay, 2 more questions. Tamara Goritova, Zaporozhye Charity Fund. I run the project in partnership with the NDI. We monitor existing processes in decentralization, election of deputies in the territorial communities. We can see that in Zaporozhye region. Can I get your question? Because we wouldn't have much time for this stuff. There's going to be a panel address on this later on. Out of 39% of chairs of village halls in the territorial community, they elect 34, and that's 18%. We monitor that, and that percentage keeps going down every time. 60% in 2015, 43. Now it's 41 after the recent elections. We wrote, may I have your question, please? We wrote a letter to the administration suggesting that efforts be taken jointly with the existing government in order to improve the situation. It's been 3 months after that, still no reply from the governor or from the incumbents that take care of gender equality in my region. Ivanna, I appreciate you using the infographics. I really do. So you are welcome to check with the regional administrations. They should not just watch the projects come and go. They need to help us join efforts and strive for better results. In Zaporozhye region, there are different groups of MPs and different councils, but it's important to see joint efforts of women and civil society sector. I wish we had a question from you. We're collecting questions for the panelists right now because there will be time for exchanging opinions. Everybody stays in the Congress. That's actually one of the things that I guess we're going to be able to fulfill when the office of the government officer has started working. So we will reach the chairs of regional administrations and we're going to get them to do things. We're going to have people to work with up there because 24 hours per day does not seem to be enough to reach out to all of them. So we can see there is a lack of communication anyway, so our goal is to be the platform in order to facilitate communication, exchange of practices. Okay, 2 last questions. Iryna Herashchenko, deputy of the 6th convocation of the Ukraine Parliament, now around the Research Center, New Socio-Economic Policy. Everybody says that a lot is being done in the country to establish the legislative basis on gender equality, and that's true. We'll realize that passing the law is not enough, it has to be implemented. Implementation is not only done in the center, but rather in the regions of the country. So my question might be rhetoric. Do you know that in the Ukraine they do not count regional indices of gender equality or inequality? There is a countrywide index only, which is computed in this country. But without these indices, there is no way for the government institutions or NGOs to do better in seeing how things are moving, how the gender equality is progressing in the regions, who is doing better, who is doing worse, and why, and what could be done about that. That's an important tool. It's about transparency of pursuing gender policy, which is done in many advanced countries like Italy, Germany, and etc. And here's my idea. My center is an NGO. We checked with the international institutions like the UN Women, and here's my point to you all, to the government and non-government institutions. We are ready to come up with a methodology based on international methodologies in order to aid this country in practicing regional gender indices. You're welcome to collaborate with us. We believe it's going to be an important practical step towards pursuing gender equality policy in this part of the world. Thank you. We're holding this Congress in order to get those ideas from government and non-government centers and agencies. We're non-political, we want things to be moving on. The last question now. Briefly, please. Natalia Petrakova, Chernivtsi. Just one question from me. For political parties, there is a bonus if they keep 40% quota. But the question is, when are they going to be penalized for a failure to maintain the quota? And the political party tickets should be based on the better principle, because then women will stand a chance of making the top 10, which will take them to the top decision-making level. Thanks for the question. It's very topical.
яке я очікувала від залу. Ви знаєте, ми якраз в наших рекомендаціях повинні напрацювати відповідь на це запитання. Оскільки ми почали з того, що зараз в першому читанні в парламенті прийнятий вже виборчий кодекс, де є квота 40%, але я вам скажу чесно, що ми зареєстрували вже поправки.
Because we want penalties to be there
відповіді є
to
на ці
do the
питання, а те, як воно
backstopping.
буде прийнято, ми
So
хочемо
we
побачити,
are
як
aware
воно
of
буде
that,
прийнято.
and
Це
we'll
дуже
see
залежить
how it's
від
going to get done.
партії.
It depends on the ruling parties and opposition parties as well. Okay, we have exhausted the time of the first panel. I appreciate everybody, and
Плани, ми працюємо 2 дні
we
на
are going to
рекомендації,
have
напрацьовуємо.
2
Дуже
days at
дякую
this
всім
Congress.
спікеркам. Я думаю, що
I'd like to
поаплодуйте,
thank
будь
all of
ласка,
the panelists.
спікеркам.
Let's give it up
Всі
for the panelists.
старалися, я теж
Everybody tried their
старалася.
hardest, including myself.
Я думаю, що пішло в нас непогано. Дякую.
I think we did well. Thank you.
Форми ролі жінки в суспільно-політичному житті країни, погляд зсередини та погляд ззовні завершено. Дякуємо учасницям за цікаву дискусію. Пані Олені Кондратюк, дякуємо за модерацію дискусії. Шановні гості, оголошується перерва на обід до 13 години 30 хвилин. Наступна дискусійна платформа «Жінки, мир, безпека». Dear guests, we announce a lunch break until 1:30 p.m. The next discussion platform is called Women, Peace, Security. Перший український жіночий конгрес організований за ініціативи міжфракційного депутатського об'єднання у Верховній Раді України «Рівні можливості» у партнерстві з Національним демократичним інститутом, Агентством США з міжнародного розвитку, Представництвом Ради Європи в Україні, Бюро з демократичних інститутів та прав людини ОБСЄ, Представництвом Європейського Союзу в Україні, програмою ООН «Жінки», програмою розвитку ООН, а також Фондом народонаселення ООН. Так, я... Ні-ні. Шановні гості, також повідомляємо вам, що о 19:30 розпочнуться виступи молодих дівчат-лідерок, які розкажуть своє бачення майбутнього України, інновацій, журналістики та повернення до нормального життя після військових конфліктів. Сесія проходить в рамках менторського проєкту «Я зможу», що реалізується фондом Олени Пінчук та фундацією «Кока-Кола». Модератор – директорка фонду Олени Пінчук Ольга Руднєва. Шановні гості, хвилинку уваги. До ваших послуг у нашому центрі працюють 2 ліфти. Пані та панове, у нашому центрі сьогодні для вас працюють 2 ліфти. Ви ними можете скористуватись. Шановні представники медіа, записати учасників та спікерів ви зможете на першому поверсі біля прес-пойнта. Увага представникам медіа. Записати учасників та спікерів ви зможете на першому поверсі біля прес-пойнта.